everyone and welcome back to my booktube channel, Lisa in Bookland. Today I'm going to tell you about all the books that I read in August. In August I finished 9 books and I had 1 DNF. So I'm going to tell you about the DNF first. It's something I talked about previously in my 12-hour reading vlog, so I won't go through it again. It's Gingerbread by Helen and Oyeyemi. I took this out of the library, so I don't have the copy with me here. But as I said in that reading vlog, it just wasn't a book for me. I know it's very widely regarded by a lot of people. There was a lot of kind of stuff about like fairy tales in it that I wasn't really following too well. I wasn't that interested in, and there was just a lot more books this month I was more excited to read, so I just decided to leave that aside. So yeah, a pity, but sure, not every book can be for every person. The first book I'm going to talk about that I finished then was actually a new release, and that's Haven, which is Emma Donoghue's new book. I didn't even hear that this was coming out. I just happened to see it in a bookshop, and I really enjoyed The Pull of the Stars and The Wonder by Emma Donoghue that I've read previously, so I wanted to pick this one up. So this is another historical fiction book by Emma Donoghue, but it's set like much further in the past than the books by her that I've read so far. So it's set in 7th century Ireland, and it focuses on a group of monks that decide to go and found a monastery on Gaskell, which is this island here. It's off the coast of Kerry. The island is incidentally most well known as having featured in Star Wars, but yeah, there was a monastery out there that was inhabited by monks from about that time, and not obviously in the present day. They were very kind of self-sufficient, so this is kind of the start of that. So I really enjoyed this book. I will say, if you want like an action-packed book that loads of stuff happens, don't go for this book. It focuses on a very small group of characters. It's about their battle with nature and kind of the tensions that develop between them when it's just those few monks on an island, you know, for days on end with no communication with the outside world. Emma Donoghue's writing is of course wonderful, and I just really love her historical fiction. So yeah, I really recommend this one if you've enjoyed Emma Donoghue's previous books. It is kind of the opposite of her previous books, in that this obviously focuses mostly on men rather than the other books that I've read by her which focus on women. So the next book I'm going to talk about is set a little bit later, and that's The Familiars by Stacey Halls, which I got out of the library, again why I don't have a copy. So this book is about a woman who is married for a few years, but she hasn't managed to have a living child yet, and she employs the services of this local woman to try and help her to carry a child to term. And it's very much kind of focused against the background of like the Pendle Hill witch trials in England. So this is my first Stacey Halls, and I will say that I enjoyed it on the whole. I think just the subject wasn't just something I'm very interested in, so I'm just not really that interested in witches. Obviously it's horrific things that happened, but it just isn't my specific area of interest. So I was hoping it would kind of focus more on the lady, I can't think of her name, the lady's like married life and the struggles she was having that side, but it was kind of more focused on the witches. I have heard it called on BookTube the kind of witchy wise woman thing. I wouldn't be that into that. So yeah, I would still try Stacey Halls' other books. I do like the sound of Mrs. England. It sounds more up my street. So yeah, it didn't turn me off Stacey Halls, but I do think I need to be more cautious about picking up books that kind of sound like that's what they'll be about, because I inevitably just don't enjoy them as much as I think I will. So yeah, the more you read, the more you know about your reading taste, I suppose. So the next book I'm going to talk about is another library book. I think it's the last, it's the last. I did read a high proportion of library books this month, as well as like e-books and audiobooks, so that's why the book pile was quite small, I suppose. But this was Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. So this book was actually set in the 1820s, I think, in Iceland, which is not something I'd read about before. And again is based in kind of true events. It's actually this, I suppose, nearly true crime story behind this book that the author did a lot of research into and constructed this novel around. So the book is about this woman, Agnes, that has been accused of murder, and instead of being sent to jail, she's actually sent to a local family to be imprisoned until she is to be executed. And it's kind of how about she integrates into that family and the relationship she has with them, and obviously a very difficult situation. So it was a really quick read, and it definitely was a page turner. I was really intrigued by the title. I just thought that Burial Rites was a great title, and it just caught my attention when I'd heard other people talking about it in BookTube. So I did enjoy it. I really liked the way they kind of used like letters and things to kind of show parts of the story that weren't happening directly between the characters we were following, between different kind of, I don't know, lawmakers and governors and things, you know, just kind of, it was giving us the background of kind of what was happening in like the legal system, I suppose, while Agnes was staying with the family. It was just a really clever way of capturing that, and I can't remember having ever seen it done that well before. And I think I should have looked this up beforehand, but I think they might have been like actual documents because it's a real historical case, so I think they might have been primary sources. So yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of the book, and yeah, it was just something different to read a book set in Iceland. I think I've read one other book set in Iceland. I remember I read Independent People by Halldór Laxness a while ago, which is a very famous Icelandic book, and I enjoyed that one as well. A few months ago I made a video where I wanted to read one Victorian classic every month, and the one that I targeted for this month was Vanity Fair by Makepeace Thackeray. So it's something I'd had in my radar for a long time because I knew it was a Victorian classic that was set in the Regency era, which is obviously my special period of interest. And I'd actually seen videos on Nicole from A Day of Small Things' channel where she'd really enjoyed this book, and yeah, I suppose struck my fancy for that reason. I read it out of this Wordsworth Classic edition, but I'm really glad that I have this nice little Macmillan edition. Like, these ones have their place, but they're not exactly the best quality. So yeah, I do have this lovely little edition because I'd say it is a new favourite Victorian classic for me. It was absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. You'll have seen in that same reading vlog me reading some of this book. Basically, the book follows the fortunes, good and bad, of two main female characters, Becky Sharp and Amelia Sedley. It starts on their last day of school. Becky, or Rebecca as her full name is, her father was an artist. She's from more humble origins, but definitely is a go-getter. Amelia is from a very wealthy family, and it just goes on from there. I really love the way this story was told. So the very first, it's kind of, would it be a preface? From the way it's written, I think this note is written but after the book had already been read by readers. It's called Before the Curtain, and that kind of says all about how the book is done. The author really is kind of very much presenting the Regency period in all its glory and ridiculousness, and he's looking at it from a Victorian perspective, so he's commenting on it a lot. It feels like you're watching it play out on a stage and the author is sitting next to you. Makepeace Thackeray is sitting next to you and kind of talking you through things. They're like, oh, if Becky does something, Becky can seem a bit ambitious, but then the author will be like, oh, but what other choice did she have? She had to do it that way. She doesn't have the same advantages as poor Amelia, who's an angel. It's so hard to say anything about this book really without giving any spoilers, but I just really, really loved it. And there's the two female characters are I suppose the ones that the story revolves around, but there are some great male characters as well. It's probably not a spoiler to say that they both kind of have love interests. One of them in particular, I really, really enjoyed it, and just the ending was so satisfying. I just thought it was brilliant. And Becky Sharp, what a character. I literally couldn't decide whether she's such an anti-heroine. Sometimes you hate her, but she's always so interesting to follow. Amelia is great as well because it does maybe a little bit too good. Becky just really adds that spice in. I'd go between thinking that this book was really feminist for its time, and it was exactly the opposite, and Thackeray was just making fun of Rebecca or criticising her. I couldn't make up my mind. So it's just such a complicated book, and I just love the breadth of the story. It starts off in London, but also goes to France and Belgium, and it's fabulous. And really, really recommend this book if you do enjoy the Regency period. I think it was really well written and really easy to read as well. Stick with it at the start because there are a lot of characters, and sometimes it can be hard to remember who's related to who. I would have maybe liked a family tree. I'd find it hard to separate people in my head, but once you get that down, it just really is enjoyable. And there's just so much here about money, especially if you're kind of interested in the merchant classes or middle classes, or the way that people can rise and fall. yeah, I just really can't recommend this book enough. I know there's an adaptation that I haven't seen yet, so I'll definitely be watching that when I can manage to find it. So yeah, it's just, I suppose I knew going in that I would love this book because it was set in the Napoleonic Wars. There is, you know, discussion of the Napoleonic Wars here. I suppose as much as I love Jane Austen, she very famously doesn't deal with the Napoleonic Wars like directly, whereas this book does, and it doesn't, like, it doesn't bring you to the battlefield, but it brings you to situations around it, often in quite a comic way. So yeah, it's just brilliant. Yeah, I think William Makepeace Thackeray has a few more books, but just not, they're not as widely available or known as a Vanity Fair. So yeah, definitely a new favourite Victorian novel for me. Do let me know if you've read this book before and if you enjoy it, because yeah, I just don't want to go into any more spoilers. Next then is something I read on ebook. It was completely different. There's a story behind this. Oh, I was supposed to have a lovely weekend. We were actually supposed to have a party with work. We don't go out often for work, so I was really looking forward to it. So I was supposed to go down to Cork for the Michael Collins commemorations, like I mentioned in that vlog. And yeah, very unfortunately I ended up breaking my toe, and seriously just I must have slept badly because my back was just killing me and I couldn't move for an entire weekend. I couldn't lie down, I could barely read. So what I did was I watched the entirety of the North and South miniseries, which is brilliant, and after that I was like, oh, I'm just in such a mood for North and South. I was like, oh, I don't know if I'll commit to the full book. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there's any like fan fictions of North and South. And there is. And this one is called A Heart for Milton by Trudy Brasure. Brasure, I don't know. And all I can say is it's exactly what the doctor ordered. It was really easy to read. It picks up from a point where Margaret gets some news that changes her life a lot. There is a different outcome to that, and yeah, like, so it's kind of a bit of an alternate history, but also the timeline for this book goes quite a bit beyond North and South. You know, it was grand. It's actually, I think, was quite well written. Being a fan fiction, the romance was a little bit, you know, much, but I do think the kind of fortunes of the mill were explored kind of quite well, and I just really like Nicholas and Mary, and that they were in the story a good bit as well. So yeah, it just kept me busy and distracted for a day, which is the most important thing. Thankfully, broken toes aren't that serious, and my back was better after like 2 days. But yeah, it was just, I was a bit sad to miss out on that weekend, but sure, what can you do? So the next book I'm going to talk about then was actually a carryover from that same Victorian literature project I mentioned from July, which I didn't get to finish this book in July, and that's Olive by Dinah Mulock Craick, which was published in 1880. So this is the second book of Dinah Mulock Craick's I've read. I previously read John Halifax Gentleman and really loved it. This story followed Olive from the moment of her birth all the way up to, I think she's like probably 40 by the end of the book or around about. And Olive is born with a deformity to her spine. I don't think it seems to affect her movement at all, or, you know, it doesn't give her any pain, but it does give her a bit of a hunchback, which obviously you know, causes her difficulties throughout her life in terms of fitting into society. So I really enjoyed this book. I will say that I enjoyed like the first half of the book a lot more than the second half. So the first half was very much Olive's childhood, and I just really liked the way disability was handled and the way she kind of gradually becomes more aware of it and of people's reactions to her. I just thought that was handled really sensitively, and I really liked her relationship with her parents, even if Olive maybe was a little bit too self-sacrificing at times. I just thought it was really nice, and the way that she does decide to make a life for herself. It was just such an unusual Victorian book. It's just the second half did disappoint me just a tiny bit because I found the romance maybe a little bit predictable, and I was just wondering, I was kind of waiting for like one thing to come up, a conversation that you'd think they'd have to have, and it just didn't, or it was never mentioned, which I just thought was a bit odd. On the whole, I really enjoyed this book, and this Victorian project is really working out for me. So yeah, I suppose it's nice that Booktober is next month, and I will hopefully be reading more Victorian literature then, because I am enjoying everything that I am reading. So the next book then was also a carryover from July, and I think maybe even a carryover from June or possibly May. So I was reading it for a while. I kind of dropped it in July because of Jane Austen in July, and I finished off in August. And that was Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which I listened to on audiobook. What can I say about this book that hasn't already been said? As most people will be aware of, it was nominated for the Women's Prize last year. There's kind of two storylines. So there's one storyline that kind of follows this character called Marion Graves, literally again from the time when she was a baby to much, much later in her life. And at the very start of the book, it's revealed that Marion Graves died in a plane crash trying to do a great circle around the world, which is to circumnavigate the globe via the poles, the biggest circumference of the globe that you can do. So we kind of know that throughout. And then the second timeline then is about is set in the present day. Hadley is making a film about Marion Graves' life, and she, I suppose, has personal connections with planes and previous traumas with them. I will say that I enjoyed Marion's story a lot more than Hadley's, which I think is not an uncommon experience. Personally, it's obviously a very long book, but when I think back at it, you kind of just think of Marion's story. Like, even when I was thinking back at it, I was like, God, a comment I made to somebody halfway through is, it feels like I'm living Marion's life in real time, because it's such an epic and so long. But I actually forgot all about Hadley, and I actually think you could take out Hadley's section without actually affecting the book really at all. But that said, I didn't resent reading Hadley's sections. They were grand. I just think the main driver was Marion Graves. Isn't that such a great name, Marion Graves? And it follows her brother as well, which is really, I was really interested in his storyline as well. I loved when I got to a certain part of the story, the jobs that they both had. They're just not jobs I was aware existed. So I can't say any more because of spoilers. I don't think this book is overhyped at all. It is a bit long, but I still really, really enjoyed it. And I really liked the audiobook as well, because it had two different narrators, one for Marion Graves and one for Hadley, and it just really, they kind of alternate chapters. It was a great book to listen to, so yeah, really enjoyed that one. A kind of a bit of a change then, I suppose, for the next two books. So they're actually a biography. It's something else I talked about in my reading vlog that I mentioned. So it's this biography of Michael Collins by Tim Pat Coogan, and the version that I have came with the Irish Independent a few years ago. So it was in 2 volumes, but I think it's usually just in one. He was born in 1890 and kind of was very, very involved in the struggle for Irish independence. He had many, many titles. He probably most famously was Director of Intelligence in the IRA. He was the President of the IRB. He was the Minister for Finance of the First Dáil. He negotiated the Anglo-Irish Treaty. He was the Commander-in-Chief of the Irish Free State Army when we got independence. So, very, very important man. Very interesting life. The reason I read this, as I mentioned in that vlog, is the 100th anniversary of his being killed. He was ambushed by anti-treaty forces and tragically killed when he was only 31. So this biography was really, really thorough. I really enjoyed it. Very, very thorough. I wouldn't recommend it as a starting point for Irish history, or a starting point with Michael Collins even. It does assume that you know a good bit. Probably a case in point would be, I could follow most of this book very well, but then there was a chapter kind of on Michael Collins's policy in Northern Ireland after the Anglo-Irish Treaty. There was some really, really shady stuff going on there that I wasn't as aware of, and there was a lot of kind of, about the various communications he had with the British government as well. I did get a bit lost because I just wasn't as familiar with that territory, so I imagine that's how somebody would feel if they didn't have as much of a background in Irish history for the whole book. But yeah, as I said, maybe start with the Michael Collins film and maybe move on to this if you are still interested. Yeah, I suppose all biographies are inevitably a little bit biased. The biographer did know a lot of personalities that knew Michael Collins personally, and there's a lot of reminiscence from them, which is really nice. I suppose I'd be more critical of the fact that he is very, very critical of Eamon de Valera, probably, and again, inevitably. I'm not going to talk up Eamon de Valera, but Michael Collins was called the big fella and Eamon de Valera was the long fella. You can imagine which of those terms is more complimentary, but I think was kind of the most blatant instance of this, not the most important one, but the most blatant maybe. There's this interesting picture in it about of Tom Barry's wedding in 1921, which is, you know, interesting for many reasons. You know, so many famous names in one photo. It says that Michael Collins has his head down because he suspects that the photographer was an informer. But then at the end, at the end of the caption, it says that Éamon de Valera was seated between the bride and groom at his own insistence. So I suppose I was kind of waiting for that in the text to see, you know, where that bit of information came from, and it just was never cited. So yeah, I suppose it's just something that you would have maybe liked to see backed up, because although it's not, you know, too serious, it kind of does give you a certain picture of the man. So yeah, he just had a remarkable life. And yeah, I suppose the end, like the Mouth of the Flowers, the chapter is called, which it would be like a direct translation of Béal na Bláth, even though there's some debate about what it's actually called. But it's such a pointless death, and, you know, such an awful civil war, just terrible end, I suppose, to a great life. Very interesting book, and I'm glad I read this one. It's one I'm sure I will be returning to. So the last book I'm going to talk about then is somewhat linked to that. So when my sister saw me reading the Michael Collins biography, she's like, "Oh, you never read that book I recommended," and I hadn't, so I decided to read it. And that's Dublins Girl by Eimear Lawlor. This book is set in 1917, and it's about this girl from Cavan who goes to live in Dublin with her aunt and uncle to go to secretarial college, and basically she ends up becoming secretary for kind of Sinn Féin and getting to know Michael Collins. The core of the story really is about she is supposed to spy on this British officer. The reason Nicole recommended me this book, and this is literally how shallow I am, she said it's like, "Oh Lisa, they go and have tea in the Shelburne Hotel like loads of times," and like, sign me up, I want to read about people going for tea in the Shelburne. The Shelburne is kind of a very fancy hotel in Dublin. To be fair, they did have tea in the Shelburne. I did like the portrayal of her like aunt and uncle's life. They kind of lived in tenements, and I thought the work she was doing as the secretary for like the public side of Sinn Féin was very good, and I liked that bit. I did find, like, you know, the romance of the British officer, you know, a bit hard to believe. Like, I mean, okay, spoilers if you don't want to know anything for this book. Warning, I'll put something on the screen, but it's just, I don't know, like, it kind of explains my whole issue with this book. She doesn't want him to know that she's working for the Sinn Féin offices, or else it would be way too obvious that she's potentially a spy. So she gets letters delivered to like her friend's shop instead, and she says she's working in the shop and she's never there. And, you know, he keeps going out with her. Michael Collins tells her to keep going. Oh, you know, he's not suspicious at all. You know, get all the information you can off him. And then at the end, it's just like revealed that he knows that she was working for Sinn Féin all along. Like, obviously. Like, obviously he'd have done some kind of check on her, or like some kind of, like, you know, he has access to all the records in Dublin Castle. Like, obviously he would have known that she worked for Sinn Féin, and like, she is completely shocked by this. Like, yeah, Michael Collins would, you know, know he would never get away with using her as a spy. So yeah, it was a bit contrived, but it was grand. It's still really enjoyable, and as my sister said, I did read it in like a day. Yeah, I can't say I recommend it, but as I've said before, I am very particular about Irish historical fiction, which is probably why I don't read a huge amount of it. I am very particular. So yeah, that's Dublin's Girl. It was grand. So yeah, that's it. That's all the books that I read in August. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you've read any of these books, especially Vanity Fair. As I said, I'd love to hear what you thought about that. So yeah, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday for my next video.